Hello and welcome to We Debate. I'm Joe Munene. Now, 60 years since independence, is our democratic project on the right track? Is our democracy healthy, fit for purpose, and a reflection of the true will of the people? Or has it been held hostage, hijacked and manipulated by vested interests, money, and power? This is good for debate.
The debate motion for tonight, let it be resolved. Our democracy is up for sale. Our debaters for tonight are: on the affirmative side of the debate, we have Benji Ndolo, political analyst. On the negative side of the motion, we have Ella Ochieng, political and governance analyst.
Benji Ndolo, Ella Ochieng, welcome to this debate session. The motion up for debate. Let it be resolved, our democracy is up for sale. Benji, you're arguing on the affirmative side of this debate.
Yes.
Ella, you stand in opposition. We start with your opening remarks. You each have 1 minute to give your opening remarks. After the second opening remark, we will go to a main presentation. You have 5 minutes each. After the presentations, we will have rebuttals. Your opportunity to respond to each other's arguments.
And on the jury panel, we have Juror 1, Edward Kipkaila, leadership and governance expert. Juror 2, Miriam Beatrice, public policy practitioner. Juror 3, Nurdin Kagai, advocate of the High Court.
All right, we start with you, Benji. Your 1 minute opening remarks.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you to the panel. The motion today says democracy is on sale in Kenya. And I absolutely agree that we have a problem. Democracy is on sale in Kenya. Almost 60 years after independence, the evidence is rife, is self-evident for all to see. Our people are poorer. Our markets are collapsing left and right. We are running an economy that is good for the top 2% and terrible for the rest of, including taxpayers. We have wanton looting and destruction of forests, looting of public money. All this is because when democracy is on sale, when democracy has not worked, you then have governance that is skewed, that is defined by ethnicity, that is defined by mediocrity, where we shun those that are sharp and that are merited, that can bring solutions, and we embrace those that are corrupt, those that are willing to do voter bribery and what have you. And in so doing, then the broken democracy manifests itself in bad governance across institutions, malfeasance, dysfunction. Right. And so we must all agree, and I will continue to demonstrate as we move forward, that democracy in Kenya is for sale and to the highest bidder. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Benji. Ella, your opening statement, 1 minute.
Thank you, Joe and the jury. The original creators of democracy had only one goal in mind, and that is to place a people within a society at the fulcrum of control and management of legislation and governance. Key point, people. Now, democracy, therefore, at the most elementary level, refers to a system that champions for the development and the welfare of a people, and that which is organized in a manner that enhances legitimacy of governments within the framework of justice and freedom. Now, Joe, Kenya has a legitimate government in place that has been formed through elections by a majority of people who are not coerced. Number two, Kenya has a constitution, 2010, that was promulgated in 2010 and piloted 10 years ago in 2013. Now, this one has a devolved unit that has even given more power to the people than to the oligarchs. Number three, Kenya has a judicial system that dispenses justice. Kenya's constitution and through the Bill of Rights prescribes the rights and freedoms of citizens of Kenya. So, Joe, I don't believe that Kenya's democracy is on sale.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for your opening statements. The jurors have taken a position on these debates at the start, and at the end of the debate session, We will poll the jurors once again. But at the beginning of this motion, this debate, two of the jurors are in agreement that democracy is actually up for sale. So Ella, you have your work cut out. One of the jury members is in agreement with you. We will see whether Benji will have lost the advantage at the end of this debate. So we circle back to you, Benji. Your main presentation, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Joe, once again. It is actually unthinkable that all these many years after independence, our people continue to be poor, to be without hope, living and operating in a country where justice, Ella talked about justice and freedom. Where is justice? Where is freedom? He talked about the people. The people are hungry. The people are, are operating in a country where we have marauding gangs and police killer squads. And so the reality of the matter is Parliament, to begin with, has variously been described as an auction house. Nairobi Law Monthly of 2018, July 2018, the Kenyan Parliament has been described even by the executive as a house of bribes, where former CS Interior in 2017 made very serious allegations of findings of mercury and copper in sugar imports that were coming to the market here in Kenya. When Parliament conducted an investigation on the same, it came up with a conclusive report. However, the report never saw the light of day, allegedly because the brokers and cartels around sugar then worked using back channels to provide bribes of as little as 10,000 shillings, between 10,000 to 30,000 shillings, that saw the report shut down. And this report would have actually revealed to Kenyans who the specific importers of this contaminated sugar were. And it's important to note, Joe, that this is at the same time that we have an unprecedented increase in, for example, cancer cases, where we didn't really have cancer cases in the 80s. We have increased cancer, unexplained cancer prevalence in Kenya today, realities of which also expose a healthcare system that is in essence broken. The government had in place a program termed Big Four under former President Uhuru Kenyatta that barely was able to achieve anything on a lot of these fronts because there wasn't any funding, there wasn't any capacity building towards providing these solutions. And so this is what has led to the realities we have today, where I can stand here before you and say without fear of contradiction, that we have witnessed as a country activist Boniface Mwangi leading activists to Parliament, sometimes in 2015, where he led a big group of activists with pig carcasses and pig heads and blood and what have you, in a bid to demonstrate the greed of members of Parliament, baptizing them M-Pigs, a name that has stuck to date. And so this is a debate that we must have, and that I'm hoping that I can convince all of us that indeed democracy has not worked as it's supposed to work. It is all rooted in money, big money, and exchange of money and bribes. And as we get further into the discussion, I will demonstrate that the MPs are not guilty alone on this. Parliament is not guilty just in and of itself on this. We have a problem in the judiciary. Indeed, we have a problem even on the ground at the constituency level with the electorate. And so I continue to maintain that democracy is on sale in Kenya to the highest bidder. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Benji. Ella? Your 5 minutes presentation.
Thank you, Joe. I must mention that World Justice Project is an institution that ranks democracy worldwide and ranks Kenya at 0.49 against a world average of 0.5. That is between 0 and 1. So with this, we can say that democracy in Kenya compared worldwide with over 2,000 democracies around, Kenya's democracy is not for sale. Kenya has remained a bastion of stability within a rather very difficult region. Look at Ethiopia. Look at North and South Sudan. There is a civil war. There is everything you can not describe as democracy. Look at Somalia. It has never been stable for the longest time period. Look at Uganda. It is dictatorship, one-man rule. So Kenya's democracy, we can say, or I can argue from my point, that we have tried. And for that ranking to happen within that framework, it beats all the logic, you know. Now, number 3, we have a Kenyan Constitution 2010. We have tried so much that was piloted in 2013 until now. Now, I was talking about legitimacy of government. We have a legitimate government in place. I was talking about freedom. There's media freedom. We are here because of that. We can speak about topical issues. I was speaking about limits to power. Yes, this government has limited power. If you look at the Constitution, the way power has been separated, we have 3 arms of government, autonomously functioning independently. Number 3, look at the legislature branch of government. It is a bicameral system. It is divided into 2. That means we are still limiting power within the framework of governance. So I will argue that Kenya's democracy is not for sale.
All right.
Yeah.
Maybe my question to you both would be, what's the role of money when you look at political party financing? Not just anyone is able to run. And yes, it might be working well, but the implications in terms of the financing that you need, maybe that's something Benji would want to speak to as you rebut to Ella's arguments.
Joe, I think as you probably know, I work in the political space and have worked in the political governance space for the last 10 years. I can tell you for a fact that at the root core of political competition in Kenya is money. Big money, unexplained money, dirty money, avenues for money laundering. Because how do you explain the fact that the estimated budget to run for governor in this country today is something like 500 million shillings? How do you explain that the expected budget to run for president in a realistic fashion to, you know, reach all 47 counties, etc., you're talking 3, 4, 5 billion shillings. And so our politics, therefore, has become not about a clash of ideas, not about discussion of how you can actually realistically, you know, develop programs and a market opportunity, you know, kind of thing where the youth actually are beneficiaries of that. It's become a toxic mix of big money, mobilization of ethnicity and ethnic groups against other ethnic groups, as well as just outright manipulation, where corruption being the underlying foundation, the money basically is an investment to be recouped so that agenda for the person, agenda for delivery of services, etc., then takes a secondary stage. And that explains the state of affairs today, where 1 in every 2 Kenyans is unemployed. And this is really a challenge, but a challenge that we can rise up to and change. But indeed, yes, Joe, money is at the core, you know, of politics, in the sense that if you have the money, you easily have a chance to defeat a better candidate with better ideas, with better grasp on leadership, and with better energy and ability to deliver, only because you have the money, even if it is drug money or pirate money or any money. And that's the fact.
All right. But Ella talks about the institutions that are in place. What's your viewpoint in terms of there's a judiciary where you can get remedies, there's the 2 houses
Joe, you know,
of parliament?
I have a bit of a background in activism, and so I don't engage in hyperbole or abstract arguments. I don't engage in academic, you know, theoretical permutation of what if this, what if that. And so we can have the musical chairs and dance of, state-captured institutions, running around and trying to look like they're doing anything. Or we can go to talk to fact and to talk to Kenyans in an honest manner to say, this is the root cause of your problems. And indeed, voter bribery ranks up there. Indeed, bribery within parliament also is there. And until we speak to these issues in an honest manner and find the nerve within us to move, to prosecute this kind of thing and to oppose it, then we can just sit here and say, we have institutions, we have EACC, we have KRA, we have Police Oversight Authority, we have Police Service Commission, we have the Inspector General. We can talk all this lofty stuff, but the fact is that killer squads that do not respect the Constitution, that have no regard for the rule of law, that have no regard even during recruitment for meritocracy. Those are the realities of the Kenya we have today. And until we are willing to speak to that, Joe, and to fix that, then we can continue to write reports and shelve them. It won't change.
All right. Ella?
Yes.
Your rebuttal to
Joe,
what you've had?
Yes, I'm perturbed to listening to my friend here say disputing science and the numbers. This is a report that is scientific. You've talked about money being at the center of democracy, but money in itself is everything, all right? Though it does not define the institution or the framework of democracy. I said earlier in my introduction that democracy is simply the exercise of people giving their own government legitimacy. Now, legitimacy means we have a government in place that has been voted by a majority, which is 50+1. We have a judiciary in place that those aggrieved within elections can go to. Kenyans can seek justice through the judicial system. It dispenses justice in all its forms. Now, my friend here talks about institutions and all that. Yes, good. We have institutions in place. It means every checks and balances within government are taken care of.
You're ranking Kenya a middle-income country. The country itself is literally grinding to a halt owing to national debt. A quiet national debt crisis where we're borrowing money to pay money. And money that has been borrowed and then looted. And so I'm very skeptical about the rankings of these organizations. And I will go a little more into this later, but it is always an unfortunate tactic to compare a country like Kenya to Somalia, which didn't have a government for 30 years straight. It is excusing bad behavior. It is a weak tactic. It is like yourself, Joe, comparing yourself to almost a newborn child. It's inexcusable and unacceptable.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll give you a chance to chip in on that.
I think my friend here does not maybe understand the history of Kenya, the struggles we've gone through since independence. We are now just 60 years old. Comparing Kenya to other mature democracies, we can only describe democracy as mature because that means that it is premised on growth. We grow. Yes, there's no perfect democracy, but challenges exist. And ours has been a positive trajectory from independence to now. We have had tests within our democratic system. 1982 coup, repeal of, that made Kenya, 1982 coup that made Kenya a de jure state, one-party state. An improvement in, that is 1982. 1992, an improvement by repeal of Section 2A. 2007, post-election violence happened. After that, we did a promulgation of, we promulgated the new constitution that has given us devolved system of government. It means more power is down to the people. More services are down to the people. The government is responsible to the people, and the people are at the center of governance.
All right, Benji, before we take the break, wouldn't you say that every 5 years we give the people a chance, or rather we the people get a chance to elect the leaders that we want, and that our choices are actually reflected? So if the people are okay with that situation, what is wrong with the democracy that we have?
You know, Joe, that's such a good philosophical question. You know, what choice do the people have? You are poor, you are underpaid even when you are working, your family is hungry, your government has not put mitigation systems in place, for example, when there is no rain. So the most you can do is to look for kind of what you call daily bread in forms of, Mheshimiwa has come, I need 100 shillings to buy unga for my family. Indeed, like I said, the electorate are not innocent. Remember, we also had a lot of illiteracy, therefore ignorance as well, as one of the key, issues identified at independence. And so, it is such a conundrum. It is such a dilemma, which comes before the other, the chicken or the egg. I do agree with my opponent, Ella, when he says that it is mostly a positive trajectory. I agree with that. But this is only owing to the fact that the people of Kenya are very resilient, very tough, and very hardworking. Otherwise, the country would have collapsed under all this assault of, what he calls a struggle that we've been struggling. But looting is not a struggle. Thank you.
All right. Okay, on that note, we are now at the halfway point of this debate. The motion, is our democracy up for sale? We will come back in the second half with questions from the jury team, as well as cross-examination between the two debaters. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back to the debate. A quick reminder for you to engage with us on this debate motion on the social media handles appearing on your screen right now. So we start this second half with cross-examination. Then we'll take the jury questions. We'll start with you, Ella. You have an opportunity to ask 1-2 questions of your opponent. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Joe, and the jury. I have this opportunity to ask you one question.
Yes.
Benji, do you believe that the 2022 elections in Kenya, because that is the premise of democracy, do you believe 2022 elections were better managed than the 2017 elections? And in that follow-up, do you believe that the 2017 elections were better managed than the 2013 elections? Do you believe that the 2013 elections were better managed than the 2007 elections?
Joe, that's a good question. And indeed, I agree with Ella that yes, given that there was an open portal in the 2022 election, the 2022 election was a better organized and better executed election than the 2017 election. I believe it is one of the reasons why this election was not nullified by the Supreme Court. The 2017 election had very troubling realities. You remember the whole discussion about opening the server and the fact that the server was never opened. The 2013 election, while better than the 2007 election, had all the issues and hallmarks of hacking and rigging. Because now we're in a digital economy, a digital reality, so perhaps rigging is not what it used to be in the 1990s, where you have a Land Rover of provincial administration running with stuffed ballots and what have you. It's a little more sophisticated. Now, we've actually seen allegations of the same in the US election under then President Trump. And so, like I said, I agree with my opponent, Ella, that it is a positive trajectory. And the reason we're having this discussion, Joe and the panel, is because in actual fact, there is hope that we can have a better democracy, that we can have a more independent IEBC, that we can have more independent institutions. It's why we've discussed state capture. you cannot solve an issue if you don't discuss it. You cannot solve a problem if you don't confront it. And so all is not lost, but as it is now, you know, the whole issue of political parties, fundraising, and what have you, while there was attempts to, you know, regulate via legislation, those attempts fell flat on their face. And so, yes, we have made progress, but certainly not enough. And especially if you look at it from the standpoint of what is the function of government, to protect citizens, to provide opportunity, then you're not just providing government just for a few guys to run around and in guzzlers and waste taxpayer money.
That means you are improving, right?
We are improving, but we have a long way to go and lots of reforms to make at the same time.
You know, my friend Benji is a social activist.
Yes.
He's been in this field for a very long time,
Yes.
the civil society groups and all that. Yes. I see him on Twitter. He talks about topical issues all the time. Now, Benji here would be in prison if not for the freedom of this country. Do you believe Kenya is free? And do you believe you have rights and you're free as an activist?
It's a good question, and I think, Joe, this goes to the crux of the matter. The fact that my opponent thinks, because I am a liberal thinker and a critical thinker, and somebody who speaks his mind and speaks truth to power, the fact that he thinks that I should be in prison, while obvious, you know, perpetrators of injustice and obvious corrupt lawbreakers, murder attempt suspects are themselves sitting in parliament. Others are governors. We saw a case where a sitting governor was actually having his official vehicle and official security detail at industrial area remand jail while he was on trial for murder, where his own personal aide was one of the key suspects arraigned in court. The fact that he thinks that someone like myself should be in jail for speaking the truth, that tells you what the problem is and that we still have a long way to go. We are on the right track, yes, and even the much that we've achieved is thanks to the late Honorable His Excellency Mwai Kibaki, who was very fundamentally at core a leader that wanted to expand democratic space and managed to do so.
Can I interject? You talk about these murderers and all that sitting in parliament, but 2022, and here as we speak, for the first record time, there's a politician in jail, actually, over corruption. So I don't understand why you're disputing the justice system and you're giving it a negative picture when in actual sense, these same people you describe as bad, as murderers, as political oligarchs who have taken capture of our democracy, one is in jail. Are you aware of that?
But, panel, that is one out of...
That's an improvement, right?
That's 1 out of 100. At best, that is 1%. Yeah. And that makes my point. It's not good enough. That is one. We've had all the scandals from the days of May scandal to devolution money to BBI, things that are neither here nor there, looting of exchequer money, exaggeration of SGR costs, and the stuff. We've done a lot of this stuff in civil society groups, and none of these people are even arraigned. So this at best is 1%. 1% is not even an E. It is an absolute fail.
All right.
So backed by data. That is not scientific.
It's not scientific.
Yeah.
Benji, your chance to ask Ella 1 or 2 questions.
Let me make a point here that I made, and let me ask my opponent make this point in form of a question. A survey done by Afrobarometer, a non-partisan research network, shows that Kenyans themselves believe that more than 50% of their MPs that they elect are corrupt. This is scientific finding. You talked about finding, you talked about data. Kenyans themselves, if you look at the data from Afrobarometer, reported in the Business Daily of January 2021, believe that most of the MPs are corrupt. My question to you, Ella, is do you believe MPs are corrupt, number one? Number 2, why are they corrupt? Number 3, why is it okay for this country, 60 years after independence, to have this state of affairs? Because it seems like you're okay with it. Why is it okay for this kind of reality to set in politically? That MPs are corrupt, the finding has found that they continue to perpetuate corruption, and somehow it's just okay to continue in this fashion. Explain that, please, to our audience.
Thank you, Joe. I find it interesting that my opponent here is finally interested in data and science, which is good. But to answer your question, you've talked about, you've asked me about corruption, if whether by your data 50% of Kenyans believe that our elected leaders are corrupt. Fine, but corruption in itself is a world issue. Corruption is everywhere.
No, but first of all, do you believe? That was the question. Do you believe?
It's not about me. It's about what is there, the actual reality of the ground. Mm-hmm. Corruption is bad. Nobody's saying corruption is good. That's why I even mentioned that we have made an important improvement of our democracy by having even one. That is an improvement. Look at countries like Lebanon, at the brink of collapse, all right? This is a country that has, you know, like we have the ethnic groups, like over 40 or something, right, in Kenya. But look, if you look at Lebanon, electricity goes blackout for over 22 hours in a day. You look at Lebanon, this is, if you look at their whole government structure, the president is a Christian. The prime minister is a Sunni Muslim. The head of government is a Shia Muslim. By that division, they believe that the whole country is represented. But if you look at that democracy compared to ours, it is bad, right? So to answer your question, corruption is bad, yes. But we are making improvements in our judicial service system.
All right, Benji, are you convinced?
Has
he answered your question on our Kenyan MPs corrupt in your view, in general?
You know, Joe, when a debate opponent has to resort to Lebanon, the home ground of Hamas, a terrorist organization, when everyone knows, I mean, what Beirut was in the 80s and the 90s up to today, then that tells you how desperate that opponent is, how bereft of arguments, I don't want to say logic, how bereft of arguments he is. Because you cannot compare a country like Kenya where data suggests absolutely that 1 in every 2 cups of tea taken in the UK, United Kingdom, comes from here. How then can you square off with our farmers being poor? Except to say that the entire policy system, the entire value chain is broken and compromised. Because we have opportunity to bring in so much foreign exchange, so much opportunity, you know, for labor, for, you know, development of quality products, selling those on the global market. This cannot continue if you don't have corruption, if you don't have a failure of leadership across the board. And then to have that and your only justification say, well, we're better than Lebanon. Come on, my friend.
All right. Now we will cross the floor now to give the jury members an opportunity to ask their questions. I think if each of the jurors will ask 2 questions. We start on this end with Edward. Keep Kalia. Your 2 questions just indicate the person to whom you are directing your question to.
All right. Quite a very interesting point of view on the debate from Benji and Ella. I want to start by asking the first question to Benji. You've painted a very glimpse picture for the new generation and the future generation. And we've witnessed in these current elections and subsequent past elections, the voter turnout has been reducing by about 65%. There's also reduced interest among the young people and the youth. And so are you meaning that there is no future for this generation, especially look at Generation Alpha, for example. The second question will go to Ella, and you've both agreed that one point that you've agreed on is that there is better democracy that has been contributed by elections, and every year we have an election, there is better engagement when it comes to democracy. So do you confidently believe that elections equals democracy?
Start with you, Benji.
The point by Edward is such a fundamental question that indeed this looks like a gloomy picture. I've said it's a positive trajectory, yes, but it is dogged by a lot of darkness. That's such a good question. Evidential data from the last election, just a few months ago, suggests that even during voter registration, the youth were just not taking voter ID and ballots. And during turnout, they also just continued to not show up at the poll. The reason for this is exactly underlying, the reason underlying this is exactly what I've been explaining on this podium for the last so many minutes. That democracy is a broken system. We are suffering a market, a bear's market that is transactional in nature, is not long-term. You don't see your leader for 5 years. They then show up in the short term and give you 200 shillings, 400 shillings. I heard of a case because I was contemplating a run where my opponent assembled people for a whole day, then, brought them a packet of unga and some money, etc. And this is being done in daylight, in broad daylight, in daytime, in broad daylight. In such a situation, the voters then continue to feel that there is really nothing significant for them in the long term, and certainly nothing sustainable. And so it becomes a circus. It becomes, I also had a case where an MP, where in my home where I hail from, had said, every time my vehicle passes and people try to stop me, they say, Mheshimiwa, tuko na shida, tuko na hii. Then he said, no. I bought my seat. So I would ask that you give me some space. Don't keep stopping my car na kunisumbua, because during campaign, I gave so much money, and these same youth asking for jobs, I had given them money. And so this disillusionment, this reality of, a lack of sustainable solutions and a lack of genuine participation in democracy.
All right. Ella, your response to Edward?
Yes, thank you. Edward, that was a very nice question, and I'm glad you've mentioned that the turnout this year, 2022 elections, was 65%. That's a good figure. It's not 20, it's not 10, it's not 15. But just to answer your question, you've said, you've asked whether election equal democracy? I'll answer to the affirmative, yes. Because elections have a direct impact on democracy. The government of the day is, quote unquote, the hustler nation government, has taken a positive trajectory in changing the election landscape of this country, moving from patronage politics, whereby we have leaders representing different ethnic groups, that when you look at a politician, you say, this one comes from a certain region, this one comes from a certain region. But this government has shown, and the youth have come out in large numbers to say, hey, look, we can change this. We don't want to be a function of patronage politics. We can tell these oligarchs that you cannot capture our democracy. Let us form and be represented as a young people and as a nation. And for the record time, we have the youngest MPs in parliament. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Edward. We now take questions from Miriam.
Thank you very much, and I commend both debaters for the comprehensive pointers that they've been giving us. My question goes to Ella. Ella, you speak of a progressive constitution as an illustration of a functional democracy. And I think, don't you think you're speaking from both sides of your mouth when we point, the constitution as progressive within our region, while we only partially implement what works for the minority of the people? I'll give an example. We've had conversations around the two-third gender rule for the longest time, but since it doesn't serve a particular group of people, we choose not to implement that. So don't you think that's an oxymoron? Closely related to that, and I think you've spoken quite a bit on it, but I'm still not convinced. For someone who claims that, the voice of the people is at the center of a functional democracy, and the functionality or otherwise of institutions, the IEBC targeted to get a certain number of people, and they were not able to hit that target. These are the people who are speaking and saying we do not believe in our institutions. Again, so are you saying now that you overrule what people are saying because they're saying we do not want to vote for a reason, yet you claim that people are actually at the center of a functional democracy?
Now, Miriam, concerning the two-third gender rule, I think I'll have to say that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 that we promulgated and piloted from 2013 is just 10 years old. We have done a lot in terms of trying to restructure, trying to make it equal, trying to bring equity and equality. Concerning the two-thirds gender rule, I will say that Kenya has been ranked among the most improved in closing the gender gap, with a gender gap index score of 73% and maintaining position 9 out of 36 nations that were studied. So I think we are trying. And look at the 2022 elections. There were 30 directly elected women into our parliament. I know within the legislature, we've had the back and forth in terms of the constitutional provision of bringing the two-third gender rule into place. But that is the nature of democracy. It is trial and error, back and forth. At long last, and at the end of the day, we are having a conversation about gender rule, equality, about on women, persons with disabilities, and all these special interest groups. Number two, you've talked about and alluding to what Edward asked me about how the youth give reasons as to not to turn out to elections, if I got your question right. I think we need an attitude change in the whole body polity of our country. We need an attitude change. We need to tell the young people, go out there. I know it's a weakness that we have. I cannot say we are right all the times. Democracy matures, but it matures on the premise of what we put forward in terms of our legislation, in terms of our civic duty to go out there and educate the youth and educate the women. IEBC has its fair share of challenges in terms of funding, in terms of operational, administrative, fiscal challenges. You remember that before the general elections, actually a week to, or 2 weeks or a week to, that is when there are proposals to change within the legislature. You cannot carry out a civic duty when you're underfunded, but there is hope. That is why I'm answering you that there is hope in that. The president today has, as you know, gave judiciary a whole new phase in terms of funding, in terms of vetting of the judges that had previously, for one reason or another, not been vetted before. So I can say that our democracy is growing and towards a positive trajectory. The women and the special groups will be represented well in the future.
And just quickly, wouldn't you say that the underfunding, Ella, is actually a symptom of the captive nature of that democracy has been captured. So
Yes.
I don't fund
Yes.
so that certain outcomes are possible.
Yes, Joe, because that is actually what I explained earlier.
So you agree with the motion that democracy is up for sale?
In fact, Joe, the not funding is a retaliatory action. That you don't do this that I like, therefore I deny you money. Therefore you can't operate. But can I assist my friend for just a second?
Before he does.
Because he needs
you
assistance.
directed that to me.
He needs assistance.
You directed that to me.
He needs assistance.
Let Benji and then you come.
First of all, he has dodged Miriam's two-third gender rule. You know,
That was not your question.
media platforms are very powerful because this show is watched by many people across the country and around the world. So when you are debating and you're a leader, you must address issues and provide solutions. You know, Ella says the Constitution is, and I'm quoting him, just 10 years old. The Constitution was passed in 2010. We're in end of 2022 going to 2023. We're in 2023 in less than 2 months. So the Constitution is more than 12 years old. Constitution is not, and that kind of attitude might explain the contempt they have for constitutional provisions. To Miriam's two-third gender rule, indeed we've had a very big and embarrassing challenge where the former Chief Justice, David Maraga, a defender of justice, a known defender of justice and rule of law, had even written to His Excellency the President asking to dissolve Parliament over the two-third gender rule. Now, I happen to believe that the two-third gender rule, maybe the way it was done, provided by the framers of the Constitution, you know, it's an aspirational it's an aspirational ideal that over time, either gender, but given our situation today, it so happens then that it would be at least two-thirds not be of one gender. Therefore, how I would have cured this, how I would advise through the Attorney General and then to the legislature, is perhaps what we can do is skew recruitment in the public service pro-women, so that we have more and more women in leadership, more and more women in cabinet, more and more women in CEO positions and what have you, but while also remembering the struggle with the boy child. Right. But certainly the solution, Joe, cannot be to just ignore it, to ignore the Constitution, to ignore the Chief Justice, to ignore the Speaker, to ignore the reality in black and white that says, I mean, the President must show leadership by trying to cure this thing. So
that is what he's doing.
Nominate as many as possible, but also skewer public service recruitment towards women, so that then we have more women. Part of the challenge is even campaign money. Where do you get money as a woman to campaign when you're on the trail? People ask you, who is your husband? Pesa umetoa wapi, etc. But by giving opportunity, then you allow more women on meritocracy. Not the hiring now, what they do, governors hire girlfriends and this. They say, I've done two-third gender rule. So again, we must be serious on governance and governance structures.
All right.
But also by not just saying the Constitution is just 10 years old, so we can break it until it's
Ella?
20 years old.
When the opportunity to respond?
Yeah,
1
thank
minute.
you. When I asked my friend Benji if the 2022 and previous elections were better managed in that sequence, he answered to the affirmative. He confirmed that the last elections were better than 2017. 2017 were better than the previous ones. Now, this points out to the whole system of democracy. But just to answer your, to interject on your point, I believe democracy as Kenya in the state that we are growing. And that has been my point. I didn't say it is perfect. I'm saying that's why you cannot say even the most, the countries with the better democracies can only be described as mature. It is an element of growth.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, we now take the last set of questions from Nurdin. Indicate the person to whom you are directing your questions to.
Gentlemen, it has been engaging, so I have two questions. I'll start with you, Ella, and then the last one to Benji. So, Ella, my question to you, you've talked about strength of institutions and separation of powers. Now, with my legal backing as an advocate, I'll start by quoting a line from Young Thug. He's a hip-hop artist. He says, first you get the money, then you get the power. The reason for saying that is that, what are your comments when you hear the ODPP and the prosecutor, Nordin Haji, my namesake, saying that the cases that are there are being withdrawn. And these are people who, during the former regime, were not close to power and had numerous cases. But now, since they're in power, their cases are being withdrawn. Do you think his actions actually exude public confidence, seeing that freedom is here and cases are being withdrawn? To Benji, and I go straight to the comments by the Fafi Member of Parliament, where he says we need to have a discussion on extension of term limits. Now, what do you say to Kenya and Africa as a whole needs democratic governance as opposed to benevolent dictators? What do you say to that? Because what we see, we tend to see democratic elected leaders turn into autocratic leaders by trying to sponsor their members to actually change term limits, as we've seen in countries like Uganda or our neighbors.
Rwanda, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, we'll start with you, Ella. And maybe just to give context to that last question, isn't it in his mandate to put forward any motion that he wants to put? And we then trust our institutions that they will do their work and do the right thing? So that's an angle I'd want us to look at on that last question. Ella?
Thank you, Joe. And Nordin, thank you for such a brilliant question. But I think whatever you have said is it answers to what I've already talked about. Now, the cases are being withdrawn. You know, the judicial service or the judiciary in Kenya operates. You're a lawyer, you're an advocate. You understand that for you to be, there's a presumption of innocent until proven guilty. However much you are a murderer, however much you are corrupt, if you cannot argue your case in court and present evidence that the guy is corrupt, that the guy is a murderer or the guy is a thief, then you're innocent. Whatever we are seeing happening now, especially after the transition, explains the whole concept of democracy maturity. Now, I can say that our institutions are growing. These are institutions, we only need strengthening and confidence and to inject more what we call civic education to our people to understand that power in itself is not, we are not in an autocratic system. Power has been divided in all its forms within the whole concept of governance.
Okay. So I think we'll give Benji your response to Nordin's question.
Nordin began by saying that he quoted I Love Music, a hip-hop artist that says, first you get the money, then you get the power. I work as a political consultant, and many of the potential candidates who've ever come to me for strategy, I always begin by challenging them. You know, and this is what my rhetorical reaction to that is. Power for what? You want to get elected, but what's the purpose behind your bid for election? And I always tell my clients that there is nothing worse. People think that losing an election is the worst thing. No, Nordin. There's nothing worse than aspiring for a seat, planning, mobilizing, financing, campaigning, getting elected, and then you can't deliver anything. That is the worst. That's one of the things that politicians never think through. To be a failed president is completely undiscussable. To his question on the Fafi MP's remarks, we agreed two-term limit. It is two-term limit. We are not trying to compare ourselves to Beirut, to compare ourselves to Somalia, and then to aspire to become Uganda. Let us be serious with Kenyans. We are moving forward under all the difficult circumstances. We are a two-term limit presidential system that cannot be given any hope or life just by even discussing it. So the Fafi MP was playing around. The fact that we even call him Fafi MP tells you what is obvious, that most people don't even know his name, and they don't need to. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the jury questions, the question and answer phase. Now to the debaters, you now have an opportunity to summarize your arguments with your 1 minute closing statement. We'll start with you again, Benji. 1 minute.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you much, everyone. Thank you, Joe, for having me here today to talk to the Kenyan people about our democracy. As I've made, hopefully, very convincing arguments, our democracy is for sale in this country. It has degenerated. It is not where it needs to be. But Parliament is just one side of the story. As far back as 2013, Honorable Raila Odinga, one of Kenya's most experienced, controversial, and loved politicians, asserted, including to international media, that democracy is on trial in Kenya and that institutions, including the Supreme Court, sell justice to the highest bidder. This is most unfortunate because a government that bullies and buys its way into power has no legitimacy. He is not a government that is chosen by the people and then therefore can only come to loot. Such an administration cannot uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. Therefore, we must continue to champion democracy, to stand for it as tough as it is, and to lay the blame where it needs to be laid, because Kenyans themselves, the electorate, are also not blameless in this terrible state of affairs. In fact, they are in the first place of the equation, since they demand bribes to vote, and very willingly jump into ethnic bandwagons and euphoria, the so-called waves in this country, so that if somebody is a criminal, is even somebody sitting in remand, as long as you're in the right political party for the zoning, then there is really no regard to individual characteristics of a leader, and a leader, even who is strong, has no chance against that kind of wave. And so the Kenyan people are not blameless, though they pay the bulk of the price when it comes to the suffering, when you can't provide for your family, when the healthcare system is broken, when police are outrightly, manifestly corrupt, therefore there's no security, therefore there's extraction of bribes. All of this is a function of a broken democracy, and therefore, indeed, we have an opportunity and a chance every day to make it a better country, to make it a better democracy, and it is my hope that we will work towards that kind of pathway. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Benji. Ella, your 1 minute closing statement.
Thank you, Joe. It has been a wonderful, wonderful debate, intellectually driven. I have to say that our democracy is growing, like I've mentioned through the points before. That does not mean we are mature. We are just towards the global average. I believe that as a system, we need to improve. Not saying we are perfect, but we need to improve. There are certain things we need to take care of. Corruption has to end. And I'm glad that one of the MPs is actually in jail, a very powerful person, towards that trajectory. We need to take that to end systemic corruption. Now, we need to observe the rule of law and uphold the principles of constitutionalism as a country. We also need to change our attitude towards our politicians and towards the whole structure of governance. So yes, our democracy has not reached a level whereby it is at the brink of failure. No, but our democracy is growing. We have a constitution that protects, that dispenses power, that upholds freedom, that with the judicial system that is well functioning. So Joe, as a country and as Kenya, we believe that we are in the right trajectory. The government needs to bring up more young people into the platform on the decision-making table. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ella. We have to bring it to a close at this point in time. A big thank you to Benji and Ella for a thoughtful, insightful debate. Have the debaters done enough to sway the jury members to their side? Let us find out now.
At the beginning of the debate, 2 jurors were in support of the motion, 1 was against. Have the debaters managed to win over their jurors with their argument?
Well, the jurors' verdict is in. At the end of this debate on the motion, let it be resolved, our democracy is up for sale. 2 out of the 3 jury members are in support of the motion. 1 of the jury members is against. So we have an unchanged position from the opening position that the jurors had been polled at. Well, that's the position of the jury team. Do you agree with it back at home? We welcome your feedback, comments on these debates. Please engage with us on the social media handles appearing on your screen right now. A big thank you to our two debaters once again, members of the jury team, our location host, the Norfolk Hotel, the KTN team behind this production, and of course you, the viewer, for tuning in and participating in this important conversation. My name is Joe Munene, and I'll see you at the next debate.